It's June 2025 and almost 335 years to the day in 1690 when a very orange king landed in this harbour, and he wasn't wearing high-vis or riding a speedboat. Located on what was originally called Carrickfergus Loch well into the 17th century, until Belfast grew into a larger city and usurped the name, the town of Carrickfergus has a history dating back far enough to make it both one of the oldest towns in Ireland and one of the most archaeologically excavated. Artefacts in the town's museum shows evidence of early hunter-gatherers occupying the area with flint and stone axe heads found in digs. The town's name is said to be taken from Fergus Mon, or Fergus the Great, the legendary king of Dalriata, a Gaelic kingdom that covered most of western Scotland and northeastern Ireland. According to one tale, his ship ran aground on a rock off the shore, which became known as the Rock of Fergus, or Carrickfergus. However, the first settlement in the town didn't come until around 1170, when Anglo-Norman knight John de Courcy invaded Ulster, establishing his headquarters in the castle he had built on Fergus's Rock. He ruled the area as a minor king until he was ousted and expelled from Ulster by fellow Anglo-Norman knight Hugh de Lacy around 1204, with the tacit agreement of King John. Hugh's tenure didn't last long, as King John, in a pattern that eventually led to Magna Carta, relieved him of his command 6 years later when he turned up in Carrickfergus to take the castle under royal authority. De Lacy did eventually get control back in 1227, but following his death in 1242, the castle and town were captured on a number of occasions, most notably in 1315-16 by Edward de Bruce. In 1402, the town was largely destroyed by a Scots army, but the town was rebuilt and was the site of a defeat for the forces of Queen Elizabeth I's English army against the Scots clan of MacDonald during the 9 Years' War in November 1597. 2 years later, in 1599, Sir Arthur Chichester was appointed the Earl of Essex to govern the town and castle, and was responsible for the plantation of English and Scots into Ulster and the island of Ireland more widely, that ultimately helped create the sectarian divide that still rumbles to today across Northern Ireland. In early 1689, Jacobite troops had seized all of counties Down and Antrim to bring them under their control. The religious wars pitted those loyal to the Catholic James II against those of Protestant William of Orange, by now William III, and following their successful capture of the castle in the summer of 1689, William made plans to travel to Ireland. On the 14th of June 1690, William of Orange landed at Carrickfergus Harbour, and within weeks he was engaged in the Battle of the Boyne, which his victory at helped to bring about the end of any hope of James to regain the crown. Its impact is still felt to today, as it's William's victory on the 12th of July 1690 that's celebrated by the Orange Order marches across Northern Ireland that for many years were the flashpoints for so much intercommunal violence during the years of the Troubles and even in the years after the Good Friday Agreement. Carrickfergus was the location of the last witchcraft trials in Ireland in 1711, during which 8 women were convicted, despite even one of the judges suggesting they should be acquitted, and sentenced to a year's imprisonment and 4 sessions at the pillory. During the 7 Years' War in February 1760, the town was briefly captured and held to ransom by French forces. Following its completion of the Harlan and Wolff shipyards in early April 1912, the Pride of the White Star Line, the brand new RMS Titanic, moored off Carrickfergus overnight before she continued on her journey down to Southampton, and her first and final paying voyage. The town, along with the rest of Northern Ireland, was an important military base for US naval and air operations during World War II, with the 1st Battalions of the elite US Rangers based in Sunnylands Camp on the outskirts of the town. After the war, the town became an industrial centre, and by the 1970s was involved in textiles and tobacco, with an ICI man-made fibres factory, a Coulthard's rayon works, and a Rothman cigarette factory, all based in the town. The town suffered during the deindustrialisation that swept across the whole of the UK, not helped by its frontline role in the Troubles, with both the UVF and UDA paramilitary groups having a presence in the town. Extinct since 1883, the title of Baron Carrickfergus was resurrected and bestowed on Prince William on his wedding day in 2011. Construction on Carrickfergus Castle started almost as soon as John de Courcy took control of the land, with the initial castle completed sometime around 1177. De Courcy built what is today the inner ward and a small bailey at the end of the rocks, surrounded by a high curtain wall and east gate. Over time, he also developed the main keep, including the Great Hall. Surrounded on 3, almost 4 sides by the sea and out high on a rock promontory, the castle commanded what was then Carrickfergus Loch and all the land approaches to the small walled town that developed beneath the shadow of the castle. The castle was extended in 1217 after it had passed into the hands of the monarch, as the then constable of the castle was assigned £100 to build a new curtain wall to cover the approaches along the rocks, protecting from potential vulnerabilities over the sands at low tide. After that, a new gateway was built, which included a chapel on the upper floors next to the portcullis and murder hole, with works on those completed around 1250. The castle remained the Crown's principal residence and administrative centre in the north of Ireland, despite being briefly captured by Jacobite forces in 1659. The castle was garrisoned continuously for around 750 years, up until 1928, when its ownership was transferred from the British Army to the newly established Government of Northern Ireland, who immediately preserved it as an ancient monument, with many of the additions and amendments made for the castle in the Victorian era removed, returning it to how it would have looked at the end of the Norman era. During the Second World War, the castle served as an air raid shelter for the town. Located within former barrack buildings in the centre of town, the Carrickfergus Museum is a small local museum showing a selection of archaeological finds from the nearby area, as well as historic artefacts from around the town, including parts of the old walls, as well as more recent items such as an original horse-drawn fire engine. At the time of visiting, the temporary exhibition space has a display for the 80th anniversary of VE Day about the impact of the Second World War on the town and its residents. Located just outside the walls are the mill ponds, formerly the power source for a mill which was located on the site and fed by the Sulatoba River which runs through the site. The ponds have been turned into a nature reserve and have become a haven for wildfowl, as well as a pleasant place to wander around when it's not absolutely chucking it down. Though this being Ireland, if you're not happy with the weather, give it 10 minutes and it'll change. About 5 miles northeast of Carrickfergus and at the very top of the Belfast Loch is the town of Whitehead, and beyond the town the volcanic cliffs of Blackhead and its lighthouse. The town sits in the natural bay formed by the limestone cliffs of Whitehead and the volcanic cliff of Blackhead. The town was developed towards the end of the Victorian era and into the Edwardian age by the railways as a seaside holiday destination, originally from Belfast and later from further afield. Most of the development of the town was carried out by the railway, and much of that by a single driven engineer called Berkeley Dean Wise, who helped build up the town's infrastructure and develop attractions including the bandstand, bathing boxes, a slipway, pavilion with 500 seats, and perhaps most impressively, the Blackhead Coastal Path. The Coastal Path was the key attraction to draw in crowds of Victorian day trippers from Belfast, as well as longer-term holiday makers. Construction was undertaken in 1892 and completed within the year. The path starts down at sea level and follows the contour of the coastline around the volcanic plug of Blackhead Cliff, with a path hanging off the side of the cliff and in places crossing gaps over bridges which provide vantage points for looking up the cliff and out over the mouth of the loch. Over the years, the path has come under pressure from the erosion of the cliffs and repeated landslides. In 2018, the pathway had to be closed because of health and safety concerns and the risk of landslips. The council undertook a complete renovation of the path during 2019, with it reopening in time for the summer of COVID in July 2020. Another landslip in 2021 closed the path again, with further remedial works carried out to prevent further damage. Today, the pathway still follows its original route, though the Victorian-era bridges have all been replaced with modern concrete structures, though a lot of the original infrastructure still exists. Including the impressive tunnel through the cliffs part way along the route. The Blackhead Coastal Path was a successful testbed for the idea of a coastal path, and a few years later the railway and Berkeley Dean Wise would go on to develop the more famous Gobbins Path, slightly further up the coast, though in June 2025 that path had been closed once again due to landslides. At the end of the coastal path, a set of steps climbs up the hill to Blackhead Lighthouse that sits on top of a cliff. Construction of a lighthouse commenced in 1899 and was completed by 1902, so the coastal path is actually older than the light. It was automated in 1975, having had its foghorn deactivated 3 years earlier. Five miles further up the coast and you reach the port town of Larne. Larne is believed to be one of the earliest inhabited parts of the island of Ireland, with the earliest inhabitants moving across from Scotland. The stretch of sea across the North Channel between Scotland and Ireland is as narrow here as the English Channel between Dover and Calais, to give an idea of how close the two islands are at this point, and has led to a large number of, sometimes fanciful, suggestions of building a bridge to replace the long-standing ferry link between the two. After Whitehead, the Chaine turns inland from the top of the Belfast Loch and the Irish Sea, and then runs alongside the western bank of Larne Loch, formed by the Island McGee Peninsula. Larne Loch is a sea loch, which means it's tidal, with the lower reaches being mudflats and marshes at low tide, though at the sea end, the deep harbour turned Larne into an important port. Marking the southern part of the natural harbour, Curran Point in Larne is home to the ruins of the four-storey townhouse of Olderfleet Castle. The original building was constructed around 1250 by the Scots-Irish Bissett family. In 1315, Edward de Bruce landed here with his 6,000-strong army on their way to conquer Ireland, stopping off in Carrickfergus along the way and being welcomed onto the island by the Bissetts. Elizabeth I considered the castle so vital to the protection of her realm that she seized the castle for the crown and appointed a governor to look after it in 1569. However, just 18 years later, the castle was claimed by the MacDonalds and dismantled the following year. Construction of the current building started sometime around 1612, and in 1621 it was granted to Sir Arthur Chichester. In 1938, the building came into possession of the Northern Irish government to protect it from further dereliction. The other side of the ferry port, you reach the seafront of Larne, and here there are a number of memorials. Perhaps the most important is the one to the MV Princess Victoria. The ship, launched in 1947 by the railways, was one of the first roll-on roll-off ferries and was assigned the Stranraer to Larne route. During a storm that lashed much of Western Europe on the 31st of January 1953, the ship ran into troubles while making the crossing from Stranraer to Larne, and despite rescue efforts, eventually sank with a loss of 135 lives, including all of the women and children on board. The storm would later go on to cause a sea surge in the North Sea on the opposite side of Great Britain that would take many lives down the east coast, including the devastation of Canvey Island in Essex and across the Dutch and Belgian coasts. A short distance down from the memorial to the tragedy of the MV Princess Victoria is the Memorial Tower to James Chaine. Built to resemble a historic Irish round tower, this memorial and lighthouse was built in 1888 to commemorate James Chaine, the former Member of Parliament for Antrim who died 3 years earlier. James had been instrumental in developing the fast ferry link between Larne and Stranraer, strengthening the ties between the two communities and ensuring a speedy connection via sea and land from Ulster to Great Britain. He was also one of the key figures behind the building of the port and harbour at Larne, as well as financing some of the railway lines that eventually made it to the town. Today, the memorial tower stands at the mouth of Larne Harbour. Carrickfergus is located on the Belfast to Larne railway line with half-hourly connections to Belfast Grand Central and Whitehead and hourly services onto Larne. Larne Harbour has ferry services across to Cairnryan in Scotland, with alternative services operated by Stena Line running from the centre of Belfast to Cairnryan as well. George Best Belfast City Airport is a 15-minute bus ride from the centre of Belfast and has connections across the UK, as well as KLM flights to Amsterdam. Belfast International Airport is 13 miles outside of Belfast, linked by regular buses, taking 45 minutes, and is a hub for EasyJet, Jet2 and Ryanair, with flights to the UK and much of Western Europe.